Behind closed gates, UK theme parks are busy transforming during winter maintenance. But how does this compare to parks that never close? From ride overhauls to secret upgrades, let's uncover what really happens behind the scenes. Alright, so let's start with what happens on a normal daily basis before we look at what they actually get up to in the winter maintenance. So every day, all the rides will have an inspection. Now, in the case of most of the coasters, this will be in the form of a track walk. Obviously, if it is a steel coaster, such as the big one, or the Smiler, or Nemesis, you can't physically walk the track, but you can walk around the track and inspect it visually, looking for any issues. There obviously was an issue last year with, was it Fury 325? They were kind of cracked and separated, but that is what they're looking for. If it is a wooden coaster, such as the Wicker Man or the Big Dipper, etc., typically they can walk most, if not all, of the physical track. And in that case, when they're on the wooden coasters, they're looking for things like loose nails or bits of wood that might need replaced, etc., and report them back. And then they also look at the wheels on the ride. Now there's various things they're checking there, you know, are the wheels run down and needing replaced? Are the bearings okay? You know, do the wheel assemblies still move, etc.? And then if it's the dark rides, they're obviously going around and checking the animatronics, checking all the effects work, etc. And every morning before the parks open, all these rides will have multiple test runs before you, the guest, get on them, just to make sure that everything is working, all the computer systems are happy, etc. So then, what happens in the winter months? Well, in the winter months, the park is obviously closed. Typically in the UK, at least, it is closed for 3 to 4 months. Now, why is it closed? Well, there's a few reasons. The first one is the weather. Certainly in this neck of the woods, it gets cold and wet and snowy and windy, and it's just not pleasant. So not as many people are going to want to go to a theme park. So there's no point in being open. In addition to that, a lot of the rides actually have guidelines from the manufacturer as to what conditions they can operate in. A classic example there would be wind. Right, obviously a lot of coasters, well, every coaster has a limit, cannot operate above a certain wind speed. The big one is notorious for that, it's regularly closed because the wind is too high, but they also have temperature requirements as well. You know, rides may not operate when it is really cold, they may not operate when it is super hot. And actually an interesting one, if you've not already seen, there was an interview, Sean Evans at Lift Hills and Thrills did one of his coaster conversations with two of the chaps over in Six Flags Qiddiya. Now that's an interesting park because they've got the opposite problem where it is too hot. And actually they said with the Falcon's Flight, when the train is in the station, they are going to be air cooling those wheels to make sure that they keep running. But anyway, coming back to the winter maintenance, it's the opposite problem. Things get too cold. That means things seize up. It means the grease doesn't lubricate as much as it can. So they have these limits to what they can do in the cold weather. And in the case of something like the UK, where it is typically very cold and unpredictable, it's easier to just close the park completely. And we will cover some parks that do stay open and how they get around that, but in the case of the UK, that obviously doesn't make a lot of sense. So as well as that, this is when they do their deep maintenance. And that typically involves taking all of the trains off the track, whether it is like a coaster off the track, whether it's the dark rides, whether it's the boats off of the track. Everything gets removed and taken to their maintenance shed. And then typically things are stripped all the way back, like right the way back to the chassis. Every bolt, every grommet, everything is removed. Not Wallace and Gromit.
Jeez!
It's all removed, stripped back to bare bones, and then everything is checked. You know, what is it that needs replaced? And then they do what is known as NDT, non-destructive testing. Now some of that is just visual. You look at it and you go, well, I don't have to touch it, I know it's broken, I need to replace it. But they do also have lots of imaging techniques, whether it's ultrasound, there's a magnetic one.
This is where a magnetic ink is sprayed on the area of concern, and an electromagnet is used to make the magnetic particles in the ink congregate around the edges of any fine crack on the surface.
And various other ones. I'm going to go into the details because I've not done it firsthand, but from what I've read, there are multiple different imaging techniques to find these cracks in the structure before they become a problem, and that is basically what they're looking for. So then they have to put everything back together again and put it back on the track and run multiple test cycles to make sure everything's happy. So effectively, when you go back into that park at the start of the year, everything is basically rebuilt from the ground up. But they don't rebuild the track, obviously. They're not going to take that down and rebuild it. There are exceptions to that. In the last few years, there's been some retracking going on at the big one in Blackpool. There's other parks, Nemesis, retract, but that is more of an exception than the rule. It's certainly not something you do every winter. The other thing when the park is closed and the trains are off the track, you can do other things as well. So you can take a look at those lift motors, take them, physically remove them and do the maintenance on those lift motors. Look at the chains, You can sort the brakes out, remove the brakes, repair the brakes, upgrade the brakes. Obviously they get checked on a daily basis, but it's far easier when the ride is closed to do that sort of thing. It's not just the mechanical side of things, but this is also their opportunity to freshen up the park. And in many cases, last year, for example, Thorpe Park had their Sparkle project, and they were constantly posting pictures online of all the work that they were doing. They were painting things up, they were putting in new fences, they were replacing toilets, like all that kind of infrastructural stuff that just makes the park not look tired and make it look fresh. So it's not just about the rides themselves. You obviously want your park to be inviting when you come along, and you want it to look fresh and new. So this is their opportunity to get everything done. Sometimes they also decide when they're doing that kind of painting and tidying up, they might pressure wash an attraction, again, just to make it look fresh. Well, sometimes they don't. You take a look at Galactica. It desperately needs a wash. It's manky. It's also their opportunity to hire staff, because typically, in the case of a park that closes in the winter season, you obviously have seasonal staff, right? You'll see it yourself. You visit some parks, there are some ride ops that you will see year after year. They work there full time, but you will also see a lot of seasonal staff who may be there for just one season and then not come back. So this is their period to do the recruitment and get those staff ready for the upcoming season. So I started this and I alluded to the fact that there are parks that do not do this, that do not have winter maintenance. And you do have parks that are open all year round. Your Disney's over in America, Universal, etc. In fact, quite a lot of Florida parks, they're open all year round. You've got Efteling in the Netherlands, it's open all year round. Disney Paris is open all year round, and various others. So how do they get around this one? Well, there's a few things. First of all, some of those parks I've just mentioned don't have the same weather problems in terms of it being ridiculously cold and rides unable to operate. Some of them do though. If you look at Efteling, it is a park that can be snowy, it can be cold, and therefore it can have those operational issues. But they do try and keep the park open, and they basically will just look at it on a ride by ride basis. They have enough indoor attractions that they can cover when their main attractions are down, and it's unlikely they'll all be down at the same time. So that's one of the things that allows some of the parks to stay open all year round. But then that alludes to what they do with the winter maintenance in terms of that kind of more intense maintenance. Typically you'll find that a lot of these parks will still close their water rides in the winter months, because especially if it is one of the colder climates, why would you want to get soaking wet in the winter? I still wonder why Valhalla exists in Blackpool, because it's always cold and wet. But anyway, that is when they will close those water attractions. In fact, around about the time that this video comes out, I will be in Phantasialand in Germany, and it's supposed to be -5 and snowing. Great. But their water rides are unlikely to be running, and even if they were, I wouldn't be going on them because I don't want to become an icicle. So then that gets on to the actual ride mechanics themselves, and as I just said, on the scenario where we do close for the winter maintenance, they take those rides apart, they rebuild them, etc. Well, if you've got a park that is open all year round, how do you combat that? There's a couple of options here, and one of them, so when I was in Busch Gardens, I did a behind the scenes tour and they took us around everything. And it was fascinating to see inside 3 of their attractions, sort of in the maintenance shed. Now the way they combat that, for example, Cheetah Hunt, it has 5 trains. And at any given time, one of those trains is in maintenance, being given its full year service, taken apart, put back together, etc. So there are only ever 4 trains in operation. As soon as that train is ready, it goes back on the track and the next train comes out. So they're constantly cycling something into the maintenance, and that way the attraction itself is always open. It's got enough trains to function, but they are also taking care of that maintenance record, and they've got it just cycling through the different trains. Now the problem with that though is that solves some of it, but it doesn't solve all of it. If you have those issues with the brakes or the lift motors, or you need to do some paint or some maintenance or some upgrades to the actual attraction itself, well, you can't just go, I'll just turn this one scene off in the dark ride and then let the rest of it operate. So there are times where they have to plan attractions to be like in maintenance, and you'll see that if you go on the Disneys and the Eftelings and the Europa Parks, etc. When you're planning your trip, take a look on their website and it will tell you, usually 3 or 4 months in advance, these are the attractions that will be closed on these dates. And they'll obviously try and keep that to like 3-4 days typically. Sometimes it's several weeks that an attraction is out of operation, depending on the maintenance required. But that is the one risk with a 365 park, unless you're visiting in the height of summer when it is, peak, and therefore the park does everything they can to be fully open in all their attractions. If you're visiting in those quieter months, there is a good chance that 1 or more of those attractions will be out of operation for a period of time and may impact your visit. So it's definitely worth checking that when you are going abroad, if you are going to one of these parks, because if your favourite ride is not open and you could have checked that, you're going to be quite annoyed. So the one that I didn't touch on earlier was new rides getting installed and rides getting removed. Again, if it is one of those seasonal winter maintenance parks, then that is perfect. They've got a few months that they can get in there and do a lot of that construction work. You take a look at Alton Towers, they obviously built a lot of the concrete structure for their new topspin during the open season, but they waited till it was closed to bring the ride hardware in, partly to kind of tease us. Blackpool's done some of their deconstruction of Grand Prix in the open season, but I suspect a lot of the stuff's going to happen in the closed season. Again, if you have a park that is open all year round and you're doing a construction project, well, you kind of have to work around guests and you have to reroute them, and you go, you can't go to this part of the park, or this path is closed, and it's more difficult. You obviously can't have construction vehicles coming in all the time when there's guests in the park, so they have to do things at night, and then projects take longer. So there definitely are pros and cons to both approaches. That is how the parks handle their maintenance and the difference between seasonal parks and 365 parks. And speaking of 365 parks, I visited Disneyland Paris for Christmas. If you haven't seen that challenge, go and check this video out here.